Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second seminar in the LaunchPad Bootcamp program. Today, we are going to be talking about perfecting your tech. I'd like to welcome everyone tuning in today, in particular to all of the LaunchPad attendees who are in Zoom. So all of those part of the LaunchPad Bootcamp, we're delighted to host you and your mentors as a part of this program. I'd also like to give a special welcome to those watching the in-conversation of today's session via Slido. If you really enjoyed today's session and would like to be involved in the future LaunchPad Bootcamp, please reach out to us for more details. Jonathan's email will be appearing in the chat, so please reach out to Jonathan, pass on your details, and we'll be able to get in touch. Before we begin, it is my honor to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. Whilst we are dispersed across many traditional lands, we are connected virtually. I'm coming to you from the unceded land of the Wurundjeri people of the Eastern Kulin Nations. I acknowledge the contribution and unbroken custodianship of the land, waters, and culture of this country, and thank their elders past, present, and emerging for allowing us to gather here today. I pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us here today. So today's program is the second in a series of 6 meetings that will connect you with a network of experienced entrepreneurs, investors, educators with the tools and insight to grow your business. For the first portion of today's session, we will facilitate an in-conversation with guest speakers John Webster and Dylan Thompson, 2 solution architects who will provide you with their insights and some expertise into building the perfect stack to set you up for success. We'll also cover some ideas about scaling with your tech as well, and they'll be able to provide you with some tips that are really often overlooked by lean startups. Edugrowth programs like these are only possible through great partnerships. Edugrowth is delighted to have the partnership of AWS to bring the 2022 LaunchPad Boot program to you. I would like to thank AWS and the team, including Mo and Camille, who might be on the line, for their long-standing partnership and collaboration with Edugrowth. To learn more about the benefits of partnering with AWS and to apply to become an AWS EdStart member, please use the link in the chat. Now, I'm delighted to introduce today's speakers to you today. So first, we have John Webster, who's a solution architect from Hex. He's also a founder of CoRoster. He holds a master's in management in IT and has run teams supporting government, superannuation, big data, and payroll providers, and has worked for 5 startups, including 2 of his own. So he knows what he's talking about. John leads teams to develop customer solutions and is really in a good place to provide you with his experience and expertise as a solution architect. We also have Dylan. So Dylan is a solution architect from AWS. He works with the public sector customers. He works specifically with EdTech customers in all different sizes to help understand what building on AWS looks like from a technology point of view. So welcome to both John and Dylan. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks for inviting us along.
Thanks, Luke.
So we're going to get straight into it because I know we've had a chat before we jumped on, and there's a lot of things to cover. So I guess the first thing I really want to do is I want to know a little bit more about you and your expertise. So I guess we'll start with John. John, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your area of expertise?
So I've been working in IT since the early 90s. Graduated from RMIT, had a bunch of different roles sort of progressing through like a Gen X does, one step at a time and waiting for everybody else to tell you how you progress. Worked in commercial architecture, government, big data, superannuation, payroll services, a whole bunch of things. About 6 years ago, decided that I just wasn't happy with working in those environments. I'd worked for a couple of startups at that point and decided that I wanted to head out and do it on my own. So the best thing to do is to jump in with both feet and give it a shake. You learn a lot about the process in doing that. So I learned quite a bit more about cloud architecture and running a business and how to go through this process of sort of shaking down that tech and turning that idea into reality.
Brilliant. And Dylan, love to hear a little bit more about yourself and your experience at AWS.
Yeah, perfect. So I've been at AWS for 2 years, always as a solution architect, which if I had to describe it quickly, it's just basically helping customers understand all the AWS services. For those who don't know, there's 200 plus, so sometimes it can be quite confusing at times. So we're really there to just help the customer to understand what they can do on AWS. So I've got about 5 years experience in the public sector, about 7 in IT. And I guess if I had to pick an absolute passion within IT, I really enjoy data analytics. So feel free to throw me some questions on that if you really want.
Fantastic. That's a great prompt, Dylan. For those watching on Zoom or Slido, if you've got any questions throughout, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I'll try to weave them into the conversation as best as I can. Both Dylan and John have agreed to, if there's any burning questions that we don't get to, we're happy to connect you after the session, so you can really ask them any further detailed questions that you have. So we're going to get started, and we're going to start at the very, I guess, the starting point. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs for the very early stages of building a tech stack? So what's the first thing that people need to do? John, I guess I'll just start with you.
So it's first principles. It's defining your problem. So what sort of thing are you trying to solve? I think people can get caught in a trap where they think, I'm going to create an AI to do a particular thing. And you've probably already gone one step too far. You need to actually say you're there to do the particular thing. Find that item and then work that process. So talk to users, talk to prospective users about what that might look like, and find out what problems exist that you need to solve, because some things might be far more easily solved with pen and paper than they are by investing in a tech stack early on. And just as much where you want to avoid that concept of technical debt, where you've got stuff you've got to replace down the track, and trying to get the design right at first. If you haven't actually gone through the process of working with your potential customers and really worked out what it is that you're doing, you'll probably end up creating that debt just because you've gone down a path. And I've certainly made that mistake myself, where I've built something and it's been far too early in the process to actually commit to build.
Right. Okay, that's really interesting. Dylan, what do you think? What are some things, or what advice do you have for those looking at that very early stage with building a tech stack?
Yeah, something we talk to customers a lot about at AWS in particular. We have a saying, and it's two-way doors. And basically, it's about making a quick decision, but being able to back out of it quickly as well. So if it's not going to cause any harm, and it's just a test, make that decision and make it quickly, see if it works. We have another term called fail fast, but see if that works for you. And if it doesn't, then you can always reverse that decision. Quite often I work with customers and they get very stuck on the minor details of the larger vision. So rather than being bogged down by all the small things, give it a crack. If it doesn't work, you can just back out of that decision and regroup, try again. So
fail fast is a fairly alarming kind of statement to make. Do you want to, what does that mean? What's that look like?
So it's really just that. So fail fast, gather the details. So look, you did make a mistake, understand what went wrong and why it went wrong, and then use that to make your next decision. It's basically just not being bogged down in those really minor details, and worrying about failing, because you never know if you don't try.
Right. Okay. And if you're, this kind of goes back to both of you. If you are early stage, where do you go to for advice? Because you obviously, this is potentially the first time you're doing this. Do you reach out to customers? Do you go to existing platforms? Where's a good start point?
So from if I was looking at a new AWS tech stack in particular, I definitely look at things like Aws Reference Architectures. So someone before you has basically tried this problem, put together a technology stack, and it just means you can use the learnings of other people. You don't have to start fresh. you can pick up these architectures and start to run with them as well.
I think groups like this are obviously important too. So you're connecting with peers. So use your peer networks to try and see what people have done before, what's worked, what hasn't worked. When I was just starting out, I joined a group called Melbourne Silicon Beach, where I got an opportunity to meet lots of different people and also just see their pitches and that whole process. So it was actually good from a startup perspective as well. Mm-hmm. And I think there's always that, leverage that network, ask friends of friends, see what other people's experience is like, because there's, as Dylan said, we're standing on the shoulders of people that have done a lot of this stuff before. As much as you think your idea is brand new, there's a lot that's probably not super new. But that's good, right? You've got an idea of what's tested and what's failed and which ways to turn.
Brilliant. So again, for those watching on Slido, if you are looking for a place where like-minded people can get together, please go to our website, have a look at what we do. A number of programs like this LaunchPad are available to our members. So please connect at any stage. The other thing that I wanted to quickly touch on is, and again, this is a conversation that we had, and I really want to bring this to the public space. And again, if you've got any questions, please feel free to add them in the chat boxes. You don't know what you don't know. So we mentioned reaching out to people. We mentioned going through what other people have done. Is that really a great starting point, especially when you don't know where you're at or where to go to next? There might be some people watching who are past that early stage. They may be a little bit more advanced. Is there advice for them?
I think it's worth there's the concept of the Dunning-Kruger horizon, where you've got confidence, but it's really because you don't actually understand what it is that the problem that you're working on. So you've really got to use that network as much as you can. Find out other questions. There's a concept called sovereignty of data, which is super important when you're building early stage, which talks about where your information may need to sit. So what country it's got to reside in, right? And then there's privacy principles, depending on what sort of information you're working on. If you're working with kids, there are other layers of things that you need to think about. There are marketing rules. So all of that, even though it's not pure tech as an answer, impacts where your tech sits, how you architect it later on. All of those things are really important. So I think you do really, like you said, what you don't know is where the dragons are, right? So you've really got to try and filter that as much as you can early on. You're not going to get it all right. And Dylan's quite right. You want to fail fast. You don't want to spend forever trying to boil the ocean, working out all of these problems. Just be aware that they're there. And if you don't know what the problems are, then know that you need to find that out pretty quickly while you're making those early decisions.
Brilliant. It's really good points. Really good points there. I think you don't know what you don't know is something that has kind of been sitting with me since an earlier conversation. So I think that's really good. Now, how can entrepreneurs establish a tech stack that meets their company's needs? We've got a variety of people on the call here. They're all going to be operating within slightly varying sectors or areas. How can an entrepreneur establish a tech stack at that very early stage that meets all of their company's needs? And is that possible? Dylan, what do you?
So the first comment I'd have here is to look at serverless technologies where you can. So rather than leveraging, doing work on your servers, we have serverless technology, and this basically just means in AWS terms, we manage a lot of the running of the servers, the patching of the servers. A lot of the work you're going to spend a lot of time on that doesn't really differentiate your business from someone else's. So take a step back, take your hands off a little bit, and leverage those serverless technologies. What's really good about serverless as well is you often can find they're a fair bit cheaper. And this is because you're not paying for them when they're not running. And I use serverless.
Yeah, good starting point. John,
Yeah.
what about you? You know,
that takes that idea of platform as a technology,
Yeah.
and using that is absolutely a good way to go. I'd also think about breaking it down to even earlier pieces than that. You know, without necessarily building a tech stack, you can fake it till you make it. There's a lot of tools around, like Airtable, for example, that are a bit of a Swiss Army knife for storing and capturing data and seeing what the user interaction is going to be like. So if you're building a tech tool, you don't necessarily want people to be working on pen and paper, but you can, you know, build queries in SurveyMonkey or something and use tools like Zapier to link it all together. That'll give you a good idea about what that information flow is, because you'll find that your tech stack evolves as you hit things that you can't keep up with yourself. So if you've got 20 users, being able to get a request via email and dispatching something's fine. When you've got 100 customers, 1,000 customers, you can't keep up. And that's the thing you need to automate. But you may not know what those bits are until you've actually got it in your client's hands and you're doing something with it. It's a cheap, you know, you don't need to have a rolled gold experience for those early adopter clients. Remember that you're going to have different customers early on than you're going to have when your business gets established. And so, you know, your tech can follow that as well.
Brilliant. Jason, you took the words right out of my mouth. So we've got a question from Jason. If your background isn't tech, so if you, you know, maybe you were an educator and you've seen this problem and you've developed a tool for it and you want to go and start your own organization, like where do you go to from then if you don't know how to do this? Do you recommend hiring a chief technical officer? Do you leverage providers such as AWS? Like, what are the different options available if you actually don't know where to start?
I would fake it till you make it. So I'd start with, you know, I'm not sure what the process is that David's trying to automate, but you know, if you can replicate it with an email with people making a request, and then find the things that you need to automate, because otherwise you're going to hire, well, if you hire a technical person, an architect or someone else to do the work for you, they don't know the problem like you know it because they're not domain experts in your problem. Right? You are. So you need to help define what that solution is that they need to fix. You don't need to say what tech needs to do. You just say, I need a process that goes from here to here. And I see founders spend, you know, frightening amounts of money on a whole solution before they've even sort of gotten out of the gate, and that can trap them because of that. But you know, I think Dylan's team are there to answer that very question for you, and they're a resource as well. So I'd sort of handball that to Dylan.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a particular part, the second part of that question, leveraging a provider such as AWS. Absolutely. So reach out to us. We can point you in the right direction. Just because your background isn't tech doesn't mean we can't have a conversation. So I work as part of a sales team, basically. And within that team, I'm paired up with an account manager. Their background's most likely not going to be necessarily tech as well. They're quite happy to chat. And look, if we need to bring other people in, we can introduce partners as well, and other people that will quite happy to work with you.
So it sounds like it really is, it's really using existing things at that early stage, using the tools that are already there, not trying to redesign the wheel, but just utilizing the wheel in a way that works for you. I guess the other really good point there is about leveraging providers such as AWS. So reaching out to providers that can help you. John, you made a really good question. You made a really good point about, you know, if you're not someone who has a tech background, how do you have that conversation? So you just say, like, I need A to go to B, and I don't know how that works. Like, what's a conversation with a solution architect look like if you don't have this background?
So I have this conversation quite a bit with the people I work with and with my customers. So in my role at Hex, we're building technology solutions for students to connect with courses that we're putting together. But I always ask for a problem definition. I need to know what it is that we're solving. So you talked about the wheel before, Luke. You might assume it's a wheel, but until you've actually had someone mess with it, you don't know whether it is actually a wheel you need. You might need a rocket, you might need a horse, you might need something else. And so the challenge is that in your head you think you've got that solution, but you don't know what it is. If you're, like I said, that if you're that domain expert and you're much closer to the problem than any techie that you're going to bring in, you're going to do yourself and your business a much better service by really understanding what that problem is and saying, as a user, as one of my customers, I want to be able to do this. And then the tech people will be able to help you answer that question. And AWS have got a great team there that can help facilitate that conversation at that point. But you've got to have your problem defined. If you don't do that, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be wasting money and time.
Yeah. So the two themes that kind of keep reappearing so far are making sure you define your problem, and you don't know what you don't know. So always making sure that you're trying and you're testing and you're reaching out to your customers and you're reaching out to partners and having those conversations.
Yeah, doesn't sound as sexy as running a startup, right? It's not all the fun stuff, and I'm just as guilty. I love jumping in and doing coding, but I had a 2-hour session with one of our clients today. We've got a beta version of software coming out, and it was really about, I'm up to here. What do you want to have happen once you're there? Rather than put ideas in their mind, I want to see what they come up with, because they'll come up with much better ideas than I ever would.
So that's your customer. So leaning on your customer, because they're going to know exactly. I mean, you're servicing them, so
Correct.
Using them as a source makes total sense. Brilliant. So I guess the next part of this is: do we think about, when you're looking at scaling your technology, do you think about scaling from the get-go, or how do you do this? So what do entrepreneurs consider in terms of scalability of their tech stack, and then what can they expect as an organization grows? So it's a bit of a two-parter. Happy for either of you to jump in.
Quite happy for you to go first, John.
Okay, no problem. I was being polite, trying to not be. So I think early stage, you've got to be prepared as you go past early stage. Be prepared to throw out some of that stuff that you put together. You'll have learned a lot more. That ability to pivot doesn't just talk about the direction of your business necessarily, but also your tech stack. So take it as a learning. These things work for us, but as we grow to the next 10x, 100x, that stuff's not going to work either. It's getting slow. It's not responsive enough. It falls over twice a week, and we've got to give it a kick. Or you need to actually unify some of that stuff. So you've still got Zapier running, and it's going to cost a fortune. They're the sort of points where you look at it and go, okay, now that you know where you need to go, that's when you start putting things together to move forward. So then you're starting to think about those scaling options. So you've got it to where you are now with 100 customers. Your plan needs to be, how do we survive to the 1,000, to the 20,000, to the 50,000? And will these things work? And that's a great time to then bring in those experts from outside. You've got a bit of money coming in, you can pay for it as well. Because good advice is not cheap, and cheap advice is worthless. So you've got to be careful about this stuff. Make sure that you're setting yourself up for success.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Dylan.
Absolutely, and I would also just mention, start with the real basic reference architectures. Very similar to what John's been saying before. Don't reinvent the wheel. Start with these reference architectures, because quite often people will have documented issues with them. They'll have some pain points already. So say, for instance, SQLite's only going to last for so long. It's a very basic version of SQL. And there'll be upgrade paths already that a lot of people have gone through, and they might look at something like MySQL. So just leveraging architectures that are already true and trusted, you'll get a lot of advice through forums and other people who've gone that similar path before. I'll also kind of mention here as well, common with scaling, I often see that the database layer in particular is when customers tend to struggle first. It becomes really evident as users grow. kind of we get lockups, problems with indexing, etc. So if I had to offer any kind of very specific advice to scaling, it'd be aware of that database layer.
Yeah, I've just got a really good, great question. So from Anuba, when we're prototyping our solutions, typically the cost of bringing up tech cannot be recovered. What's your advice for early stage where education materials developed that needs tech to go out to the potential customers?
So sorry, could you re?
Yeah. So what is your advice for early stage where education material is developed that needs tech to go out to potential customers? So, because that's not, that cost can't be recovered for bringing up tech. So what's your advice on that?
Because in avoiding the sunk cost of putting it in. So I hope you're convinced that you need the tech to deliver it first.
Right.
I talked to Jeanette, the founder at Hex, quite a bit, and we're an education company. We're not a tech company, but we use tech very, very heavily to deliver to the students. So know what it is that you're trying to fix. Is my first point. So you might be able to get away with PDFs and email for the first little bit, if that works. It's not going to be polished, and that's okay. Like these are your early adopters. If you're trying to build a solution, then a simple web page might be the easiest and best way to get that out. I'm not sort of sure what your problem is, and so there's maybe a little bit more that needs to be dug into to give you a proper answer. But look for alternatives so that you can avoid those sunk costs where possible. Don't go out and necessarily buy something. There's nothing wrong. There's a lot of education platforms out there that you can customize. So you can, sign up for a particular program like Udemy, for example, or something else where you could deliver content. And then when you're scaling and growing beyond that, then you can look at, bringing that in-house or doing something else. It's a good problem to have that you're so busy and you're so successful that your solution has outlasted what you put in place. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I guess that kind of goes back to what you said earlier. You instead of reinventing the wheel, determining if you actually need the wheel. So what is it you actually need? That's a really good point. We've got questions coming in thick and fast at the moment. So I've got another one relating to this. Athi, I'm going to come to yours in a little bit because we are touching on that. So this is from Dominic. Have you had any experience with no-code tools like Bubble? And do you recommend building your prototype and or MVP yourself before spending money on building a bespoke solution?
So I'm a Bubble developer, Luke. So did you want me to answer?
Yeah, I was going to throw it your way just because we've spoken about Bubble in the past.
Yeah. So I use Bubble. I use Bubble quite a bit. Bubble has so all no-code tools have their uses, but they also have their drawbacks. So,
sorry, John, can I just interrupt really quickly? For those who don't have a tech background at all, do you want to just give a quick update on what no-code is?
Sure. So the idea with so if you go to Wix, you use Wix to build a web page. You don't need to be a web developer. You've got blocks, and they're reusable elements. You can drag them onto a page and put a little bit of logic behind them, and off they go and display your website. A no-code tool is very similar to that. So it's a bit like Lego, where you might where you've got a Lego village and you get a car module and you put the car there and you build a house and you do that. No-code tools work in a very similar way. They're marketed as being really, really easy to use. The reality is that there's more involved in getting them working, and they each have their own weaknesses as well as advantages. So I use them in combination. I don't use them exclusively, but they're very, very good for what we call the front end, which is the website page that people get to and log in, and serving some of that information up. And absolutely great to use. Bubble you can build for free when you start. I'd say 9 out of 10 people I know who started in Bubble who have no experience end up abandoning the project only because it seems easy and then it gets quite hard. That small group that continue with it and push on will actually learn quite a bit. But if you've got experience, of course, these are quite good tools to pick up and quite flexible.
Dylan, do you have anything to add to that point, or?
Yeah, very, very similar to what we were talking about before, but just understand the limitations of the tools you're using. So absolutely, it's fine for prototyping and MVP, but kind of understand moving out of that phase, you might have to look at other technologies. So if it's about just that, getting something in front of the customer, starting to, get a feel for how things are, absolutely leverage those technologies, but just understand where maybe you have to move away from it.
And is there usually a point where okay, now I need to move away, or is this something that you define yourself when you're looking at, this is how I want to grow? Like, is it a certain number of customers that you hit, or is it just not servicing the way it needs to, or like where is that point? I guess for me, I'm just trying to determine, do you build for your scaling needs as you go, or do you at the start say, I want to get to X, therefore I know I'm going to need all of these things?
So Bubble, as we were talking about Bubble, that's actually extremely scalable.
Right.
So you can work with hundreds of thousands of lines of database, tens of thousands of customers. That's not a problem. It's more about how you put it together, and there are a few things that Bubble has that are Achilles heels, like importing and working with large amounts of data that in SQL could do in seconds. In Bubble, it might take an hour, just because of how it's built. But by the time you're at that stage, you'll have money where you'll be wanting to. You'll have money to hopefully spend on developers to sort of portion those bits away. The other thing is, with Bubble, all data is held in the US unless you get a very expensive seat with Bubble for your own installation in country, in Australia, for example. So when I talked before about sovereignty of data, that's one of those things that you've got to think about with that. But I use Bubble for co-roster and for Hex. It's very, very flexible, and it handles, it scales quite well.
I've heard this term deletion builds being used. Do you want to explain a little bit about what that is?
Dylan, do you want me to?
Sorry, yeah, you go ahead, John.
So this is more about where you create something, but you're prepared to sacrifice it to create a replacement. So it's more like a fail fast. You're building something, you can set it aside. Again, Bubble's pretty neat for that sort of stuff, because you can prototype quite quickly. You can also take a copy of an environment and build into another one. So while your existing one's running, you can work on a separate one at the side and migrate data between them. Yeah, that's how I approach it.
Yeah. So it seems really important to make sure that as you try to scale and as your organization grows, or your as you're growing, that your tech also grows with you. You can't just keep that same tech. There will be a point where it's not going to be able to fulfill the goals. It just seems like a really interesting point to try and work out, where to start and then where to swap over. So it's a really interesting space, which I don't know if there's an answer to.
No, well, I've never seen it. So yeah. I've worked, when I worked in superannuation, we had problems where the databases couldn't cope. It took us too long to back up, for example. So when we're doing end of financial year, which Dylan was, we were chatting off slide before, was saying, we're about to head into, all those end of year things put the superannuation fund at risk of defaulting because it couldn't process fast enough. So it happens with multi-million-dollar organizations just as quickly as it happens with startups that haven't been going for more than 3 weeks. So it's you never get away from it. I think as you do more with your tech, you've got to learn more about what my backup windows are, how responsive is my service, what are my customers saying on chat about how quickly things are working or not working. We all get it. There's no avoiding it.
Yeah. Brilliant. Again, I think these are all really valuable lessons that I hope people are taking notes and working out what's going to be best for what they're currently doing. Now, we're going to move on because I'm conscious of time, and I know this section we're going to have a lot of questions about this. So I really want to explore, how do you obtain technical architecture advice when you can't afford to pay? I mean, it sounds like this is an expensive undertaking to get someone in to do all of this stuff. So I've got a few questions in the chat, but I'll just start with just a really broad one. Where can entrepreneurs get guidance on technical architecture without breaking their budget? Dylan, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I'll jump in from, I guess, an AWS perspective, and I'm going to keep leaning on it. But absolutely, I touched on it before. In terms of not paying, you can reach out to AWS. That they're not going to charge you straight off the bat. Reach out to AWS, ask for that technical advice. We can always point you in the right direction. It's a fee-free service. So yeah, I mean, yeah, leverage our guidance.
John, what about you?
So if you're bringing a consultant in, consultants are expensive. So you'd absolutely do what Dylan suggests first, and with either way, whether you bring in someone or you talk to AWS, the best thing you can do is have that list of issues that you're currently experiencing. So it takes 5 minutes for a user to log on to our system now, whereas it used to only take 20 seconds. Invoices tend to take an hour to be processed and go out the door. Things that make your process less snappy from the client's perspective. I forget what the figures were, but it's, if people need to wait more than a second without a response from a computer, they normally start feeling like the service is not working. Mm-hmm. So there are approaches you can take to fix that. You can use a little bit of smoke and mirrors. I use that term quite a bit, but you can have the little spinning icons and other things that people are staring at, and they're not even aware that the thing's not responding quickly enough. Like there's tricks that we use as developers to try and to hide some of that stuff. But obviously you can't hide it forever. So get that list together, and that's what I would be talking to your architecture team about, or the people giving you advice in general. You need to know what your problems are you're trying to solve.
Yeah. So I've got a question in the chat. Now, this is from Athy. What advice do you have for upskilling for someone like herself who has a tech background but hasn't been hands-on in coding for a while? So foundation, is there like a foundation space where you can fill in those gaps? Like, what's the fastest way to get up to date and get up to speed?
So again, when I decided to found, I went back to GA. I did a course in front-end web development just to learn a little bit more about what developers were doing and the developer tools that they were using. But then it wasn't for a couple of years that I actually needed developers doing that sort of work for me anyway. So maybe that was a bit early. When I started working with Bubble and thought Bubble was what I needed to do, then I jumped on some Bubble courses and did those so that I could learn what was going on, and taken a lot of that development off, so I don't need to pay people to do it. But you're sort of making those decisions. Okay, I'm now going to do this, or I'm now going to do that. It's not so easy necessarily with SQL. You can't just pick up Python in a week and start developing on it either. But YouTube's actually really good for that sort of stuff as well. Right, there are places you can get advice. Use forums. Developer forums are good. They're good ways of getting that down, and use your friends, pump that network, and make connections if you haven't got them.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of adding to that as well, I'd also say pick a technology that you're going to be working in. So often I see people kind of, learn a technology for that sake, and, technology moves fast, and by the time they get around to using it, it's already moved on. So, as John was mentioning before, he learnt Bubble for X problem. So find a problem, kind of do a bit of searching around what might solve that problem. And I'm a super hands-on person. I only tend to learn when I do hands-on. So come up with a problem statement and just give it a go. Just, start, especially if you haven't been hands-on for 10 years, the fundamentals are still going to be there. So, just, give it a crack. Fail fast.
Fail fast. So if you get to a point, I've got another question about, actually, I'm going to be able to weave this in. how do you determine the best time to bring in help? So if you don't have a tech background, or you're fairly basic, you can do what you can. And is there a particular moment when you decide, all right, I'm definitely going to need to get a consultant in, or how does that happen?
I think you'll know. I think
Yeah.
you'll have a problem that you consistently can't solve, and you've got customers who are giving you feedback that it's impacting them.
Yeah.
That's the time to raise the flag and see who's around to help you out of it. Architects, like I'm an architect, so I shouldn't be saying this, but we're not necessarily a silver bullet either, right? You've really got to know what problem it is that you need solved in order to get that. Otherwise, they're going to hang around and use up all your money and build things that you maybe don't need. So, you'll know. You truly will know, and it might not never happen. You might discover enough and keep yourself in front of that issue of fixing problems as you go, and you won't need to use them at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess it's really looking at your trying to find where that bottleneck is, where everything is getting stuck, and then bringing them in at that stage. And I'm assuming you would have like a list of things that you would want done, and you would say, I need to get from A to B. So just trying to work out, what to do then. I've got another question. So Dylan, this is directed to you. This is from Slido. This is about migrating over to AWS. So is there an easy way to migrate your MVP over, or what's the easiest way to do that from a tech stack perspective?
Yeah, I'm gonna do the classic solution architect thing here.
John's laughing, so I feel like he knows what you're going to say.
and it's going to be a big it depends. It really does depend on what that tech stack is, to what your migration path to AWS looks like. And the reason I say that is because there's going to be some very simple things to migrate over to AWS. Like if we're just talking about, a server to server migration, that's fine. Absolutely. That's going to be a low risk, easy step kind of migration. But if we're talking about completely refactoring, and I'm going to use a bad example of maybe we had something in mainframe and we've got to move it across to AWS, they don't just map across, and that's obviously going to bring its own risks. So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer to the question. I would kind of, circle back again and say, reach out to AWS and bring your case and tell them, look, I'm trying to migrate this stack across. What would this look like on AWS? It really is something I do absolutely daily, is talk about migrations.
Great. So whoever asked that question, let us know your contact details and we'll connect you with Dylan so you can really have an in-depth conversation around that. Now, we've spoken about larger problems within, building your tech stack, but what about those smaller ones, those little tech problems that always seem to come up about connecting Google Workplace or, little things like that? What's the best way to address those smaller issues that you wouldn't need a consultant to come in, but there's certainly, they seem to happen daily?
There's a lot of tools have actually built now to reach out and connect to other systems automatically. So that process is called an API, application program interface. If you're using Slack, for example, there are 50 tools that connect Slack to all sorts of other applications. So Google gets integrated. There's connections to Airtable. So you can also use tools like Zapier that are designed to sort of knit things together. So when a particular action happens, I want to do this. So when someone fills out a form on a SurveyMonkey form, it creates an item in a Google Sheet and sends me an email. So, people are filling out a request form and you're responding to it online. So that's a sort of typical sales scenario. I know education's a little bit different, but there are ways to sort of knit those things together. So you can either use a tool like Slack, which is designed to sort of manage messaging from all sorts of locations and then do things.
Yep.
And you can program those as well. So there are languages you can learn to do that, or you can just use automatic tools like Zapier, Integromat, that sort of thing to build them up. They eventually won't scale. So they're the things that you would replace one day when you grew. But they're super, super easy to put together. And I think pretty much all of those things are free to have a play with for hooking the onesie twosie things.
Yeah. And what's the best way to kind of source those? Is it just outside of connecting with, AWS or connecting with Edugrowth? Are there any other ways where you can kind of source that type of information?
Google.
Yeah.
Google and YouTube. You'd be amazed what people whack on YouTube. I mean, not all of the advice is rolled gold perfect, but you watch 2 or 3 videos, you'll figure out who's got it working and who hasn't.
Right. Brilliant.
We use Google. I use Google all the time. I don't know all this stuff.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of the time, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for people that have questions. So I just want to get some final thoughts from the two of you before we kind of open it up to any questions. So John, I'll start with you. What are some final thoughts that you would like to offer to any budding entrepreneurs that are watching us right now?
It's really about define your problem. So know what you're trying to solve, because no matter how you deal with this, whether you're building it yourself, whether you're asking someone to help put it together, if you don't know that, then you're not going to get the right advice. You're not going to get the right solution. So if you're not sure what that looks like, you've got to let your clients have a play with your whatever it is you're doing first. And trust me, Excel spreadsheets and all these other things, they're perfectly fine to use to start with. There's nothing wrong with them at all. And then you see where you go from there.
Dylan, any final thoughts?
I mean, especially just, expanding on what we've talked about a lot today, but just give things a go. You're never going to find out the problems with this stack until you start trying. Often I find it hardest when customers come to me and they haven't given anything a go yet. If they've given something a go and they can bring me a problem, it tends to make a lot more sense for me. There was kind of one point I also mentioned, I haven't mentioned today, that I kind of wanted to touch on. And that is around security in your application as well. Mm-hmm. When you're starting, kind of putting together your tech stack, it's quite an easy one to miss. The kind of security services and making sure things are properly segregated, users only have access to certain things. Just give it a thought at the start. It's a lot harder to retrofit into an application. So start early with security. And then there was this kind of also a final thought around, at AWS, we have this thing called the well-architected framework. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's an absolute goldmine of advice and kind of things around running your application. So we have different pillars. So these pillars are things like operational excellence, reliability, security, cost optimization. And there's a load of advice in there. And there's also a bunch of questions we as an architect tend to ask when we come into these meetings. So you can start to ask yourself those questions. And it'll get you really thinking about some of those things that are really important to have that tech stack, that, I guess, perfect tech stack.
Brilliant. So we've just we've got a couple of minutes left. So I'd really like to open this up. If we've got any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. If I've missed your question, just let me know. Any advice regarding leveraging our stack? Hold on 2 seconds. A lot of questions are coming through, so it's moving. Any advice regarding leveraging our stack to store KPI and perform some data analytics? That's from Thomas.
Dylan, you're the analyst.
Yeah. In terms of, I guess, an AWS world with data analytics, the first thing you want to do is actually start storing that data. So obviously you can't run analytics if you don't have that data in the first place. So start giving a thought about some things you might want to look at and start putting that data into what we tend to call a data lake these days, more so than a data warehouse. And the reason I say data lake, it's more about unstructured data. So just getting that data into your data lake, and then you'll start to think of some insights and some of those questions the business asks you. You can turn around and start to look at that data, but you can't run any analytics till you have that data. It's basically where I'm going with that point.
Right. I've got another really good question. This is from Shane. How do you strike the balance between utilizing technologies and platforms that you know and understand versus investing time in learning new technologies and platforms and perhaps never getting started? Shane, that's a great question because I feel like that's something that I would do all the time. So how do you find that balance?
So there's that trap of boiling the ocean, right? So I think Dylan's right with that fail fast. I think you need to, so you're going to find some of those answers as you start exploring. So you've defined your problem, you know what you're going to do, pick a solution and have a crack. Maybe do a bit of a Google research on, how well does that fit for this kind of thing? Or, use the architecture team at AWS and others to help maybe shape that to start with, and then see what the results are. But don't spend forever analyzing it because, your competitors are out there as well, and they're coming up with similar ideas and they're going to build something. So you want to get in front of them.
Dylan, anything to add on that point?
Not really. I thought John nailed that one.
Yeah.
So just start and, you'll learn what platforms you need to use.
Yeah. Brilliant. So we are coming to an end. So just to I really want to, again, hit those two main points that seem to be coming through every time. So making sure you define your problem. So know what your problem is, because that's what you're always going to go back to. And that's really going to, I guess, direct and help you determine what your next step is. And then fail fast. I know it seems strange for me to suggest that to everyone, but I'm going to trust both Dylan and John. Fail fast, try things, see if they work, and go from there. Look, this has been a really great session. Thank you again to John and Dylan for giving all of your time and expertise today. I think we've really kind of covered on a lot of different topics, and I feel like this is a conversation that can keep going. So for anyone watching on Slido, please feel free to pass on your details, and we will be able to connect you with John and Dylan. So make sure you do that. Before we move on to the next part of today's session, I just want to, again, I did this last week, but just share an opportunity for early stage startups to exhibit at the 2022 EduTech Conference. So we should have a slide coming up shortly. But basically, we've got this session coming up, and we'd love to have as many of early stage startups promoting, having a booth at a space we call Innovation Alley, and really highlighting what they're doing. The sector in Australia is something that's continually growing. So this is a really fantastic opportunity for you to get your name out there and really meet other people within the sector. So as an exhibitor, you get a dedicated stand. You've got 60 to 100 words listing on the EduTech Events app. So you can really highlight exactly what you're doing. Your logo and link will be featured on the EduTech website, and you'll have 2 exhibitor passes to the 2-day event, and then access to the EduGrowth demo space. So a really great opportunity for those that are interested. So again, that wraps up our conversation on perfecting your tech. For all of those watching from Slido, thank you. We look forward to having you join us for the next In Conversation, which will be on the 12th of July, where we will be navigating and talking about navigating sales.